Sinners was a beautiful representation of the way that country music was stolen and the exact people that the music was stolen from, and I find it funny that the music many might consider the most American is just based on appropriation or artistic inspiration without credit. In this video, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what exactly was happening in the history of Ireland around the time that Remick was supposedly turned, and I want to talk about why I think Jack O'Connell, who is not full Irish, was a really interesting casting for this role. Start with the banjo. When you think about that instrument, you might think about a movie like Deliverance and the dueling banjos there. The banjo is an African instrument. Now this all speaks for itself, but the banjo, despite its West African and Caribbean roots, really exploded in popularity through minstrel shows, which were one of the most premier forms of entertainment in the United States in the 19th century. You had white folks in blackface basically playing black instruments and performing. At this moment, the banjo had already been present in the Americas for like 200 years through enslaved Africans, but this is when it started to blow up. Banjo would become a key piece of bluegrass. Bluegrass was created by this guy, Bill Monroe. He is considered the father of the genre. Funny enough, Bill Monroe would refer to bluegrass as, quote, Scottish bagpipes and old-time fiddlin', but we'll get to that in a minute. What often doesn't get taught is who created Bill Monroe, because the answer there is Arnold Schultz, a black man who was born 25 years before Bill. Schultz was a master of the fiddle and the guitar, and he would mentor Bill Monroe, going as far as to give him his first opportunity for a paid gig. Schultz is often forgotten. He was never recorded, so it's kind of on the music world to keep his legacy alive. All of this being said, I think there's a very poignant aspect to Remick wielding a banjo, but I think there's something else going on here because country music also heavily borrowed from Irish music traditions as well as the Scots. When it comes to the Irish, one of the main things they brought into American country music was the fiddle, but also just the kind of ballad storytelling. The types of things that they sung about ended up transitioning pretty well into American music. The truly sad things about this is African Americans and Irish Americans in the US would essentially be turned against one another in an effort to destroy the solidarity of the working class. In history, people with power and money seem to like to try to divide the people who are underneath them to keep them squabbling amongst themselves so they continue to do whatever they want. Let me know if that rings any bells. What essentially happened was racism and mistreatment of black people was almost offered as an avenue towards being actually accepted as white in the United States for Irish and Scots immigrants. Irish folks arrived in the US with absolutely nothing in the 1840s and the 1850s, fleeing what I believe was a genocide by the British government, the Great Famine. Many times in the early South, you had Irish immigrants and African Americans working side by side doing the same labor, but quickly they started to realize they did not want the working class to actually be able to unite. So what was pushed onto them was basically racial division. Essentially, if you become part of the abuse of African Americans, you can then be accepted as a white American. That also involves pushing away Irish heritage and Irish culture. And so much of Sinners is about assimilation. You already have this Irish vampire who has already fallen. He's already become part of this, and that happened to him during a time of colonization. Remick is said to be about 600 years old, putting us back into the 1300s. The end of the 12th century basically saw the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland when they essentially lost their sovereignty. So what I want to talk about, we have to fast forward to 1367 to get to something very interesting that thematically is perfect when you look at Sinners. What happened in Ireland in 1367 was called the Statutes of Kilkenny. Statutes of Kilkenny were created because the Norman colonizers felt they were losing their own heritage and culture to the Irish. They were in the land they had stolen. They were starting to lose their own cultural identity to the people they had stolen the land from. There was a lot of intermarriage. Irish culture was starting to more so take over. Passed these laws to make English settlers in this territory speak English and also follow English customs, etc. Out of this environment, out of this time where you have Remick being forced to assimilate. I find this even more interesting as Jack O'Connell is technically English. He was born in Derbyshire to an English mother, but his father was Irish and took his Irish heritage very seriously. It's kind of funny, you have an actor here with split allegiance who chooses, in my opinion, to represent the more interesting culture. Jack has talked at length about how he really identifies with his Irish heritage, and that's the side he leans more towards. The Irish aspect of Remick makes this story so much more interesting, in my opinion, because there is empathy there. He understands to an extent what these people are going through, being mistreated, being looked down upon. Offering immortality, it's not just offering a salvation from the potentially terrible current circumstances that people are dealing with. It's offering immortality for their culture as well, making sure that whatever they have to offer to the world artistically will be preserved in a way. Look, everyone has said this already. They could have just made these vampires racist hicks. It could have been a simple story about racism. It is so much more than that. Commentary here ends up being something you can go back and dig into time and time again and glean something new from it every time, and it pushes you to want to do your own research. This is beautiful. There's a lot more I kind kind of wanted to say this video is already very long. If you want to hear a full review of the movie, we dropped a new episode of Goodwill Podcasting. It's available all of those places. If you enjoyed this video, I like to talk about movies, politics, history, how all these things come together. If you've seen me a few times and aren't following, please drop a follow, and if you want more, please go check out the podcast as well.